Good afternoon. Welcome to the Weekly Livestock Market Update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us to talk all things markets is University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
All right, as we get into this week, let's take a look at what happened in the markets.
Yeah, if we look at the cattle side of the ledger first this week, cash-fed cattle were down about a dollar this week. We saw higher feeder cattle prices, cash feeder cattle prices. They're steady to $4 higher, and that's really in comparison to the levels that we saw pre the holiday break that we've had as those markets have begun trading again. If we look at futures markets, the February live cattle futures contract closed up more than $3 this week, while the March feeder cattle contract closed up $2.25 for the week. On the beef side of the equation, the choice box beef price was down nearly $2 this week. However, I want to make sure we remind ourselves that's still $4 above where we were a year ago at this time. We had weakness across the board in many of the components on the beef side of the equation. If we look at barrel and gilt prices, cash prices this week were up nearly $2, while the February lean hog futures contract closed up 80 cents this week. On the pork cutout value, we did see growth this week, up nearly 80 cents. A lot of strength here late in the week in terms of what happened on the belly side of the equation. Just as we talked about the choice box beef price, though, on the pork cutout value, we're actually nearly $8.50 below where we were a year ago at this time. So very different stories for pork versus beef wholesale prices when you look at our points of comparison of the beginning of 2018.
I think we still have to talk about the absolute strength and demand for U.S. beef, not just here, but around the world, and how that's helping to keep those beef prices supported.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really talk about that demand in two components, and both of these components I think are important. Number one, growing incomes here and around the world have made folks have an interest in more beef in the diet in many places around the country. And I think that economic growth that we've seen in a number of key economies has been important to help on the demand side. But secondly, I think you can almost undeniably say that consumers have fallen in love with a good steak again, good high quality beef. And that's really a change in consumer preference in my standpoint, or in my viewpoint, relative to where we were a few years ago. So we need that to continue as well. In any hiccup in terms of all of a sudden there's some health scare or some other reason why consumers would make that shift away from beef could spell for some lower prices. So it's been a really good demand pull that has helped us with the prices we see today on the beef side of the equation.
Scott, really, as we take a look at what's been going on the markets, it's our first full week of trading without a holiday into the new year. We talked a little bit about how prices have moved in comparison. But other than that, there's not a lot going on, especially with the government shutdown. Are we starting to see more of an impact as that government shutdown continues?
Absolutely. We're seeing implications of that. So data that we all receive publicly on a regular basis is now not available to us. So trying to figure out what's happening in the marketplace day to day gets harder and harder. I think we could see situations where without these reports, one has to be perhaps a little more concerned about whether price determination is happening accurately. And I don't mean that in a way that necessarily someone's winning and someone's losing, but I think everyone in the marketplace is at having much less information, and that makes you worried that when we get this information back, have we been discovering prices that accurately reflect what these industries have been facing? That to me is one that we'll just have to wait and see until we get some data back.
Where do we turn to? I mean, we know that this data is all publicly available when the government is functioning, but where do we go to find information about what's going on when that access is shut down?
So frankly, there's very few great alternatives available for that private source of data. I sometimes say those that do have private data right now might have a real leg up in these markets in terms of the information knowledge out of that that private information that they have, and can they use that to their advantage in these markets today? And I think the short answer is that's certainly a potential issue. Um, as we get further and further down the road with no information, the private sources of data that might be available, I again worry about for those of us that are only relying on public data sources. And many times we talk about producers when we say that, become more and more disadvantaged in the marketplace.
We know we're missing some of those reports that we talk about on a regular basis, but we're also not getting export data at this point either. How troublesome is that for the marketplace, for the industry, and for those engaged in it?
Yeah, so across the board, we're just missing a lot of reports that are starting to matter. USDA this week would have turned out a major WASDE report that would have given us final 18 crop production estimates. The marketplace is always interested in that first WASDE report of the year. For us in the cattle side of the industry, the couple that begin to worry me, and we're not there yet, but cattle on feed, and then also the cattle inventory report. Although those are a few weeks away before we get that data, we're probably getting to the point where NASA traditionally would have been collecting that data already, at least going out and doing survey work. And I'm not sure exactly where we're at in that process. And I say where USDA is at in that process, but those reports could get delayed as well. And we know that both of those are going to be critical to the cattle side. But for me, the export side is one of the big ones that I'm missing. We probably know we've had the Chinese buy some soybeans, but we don't get any actual data from any sources about what those sales have really been like. We often, I've talked about the importance of both pork and beef exports out of the United States, and we're frankly going to, run in the blind here for several weeks running. So no monthly data as well as no weekly data. Hopefully the autopilot that we might suggest says that we'll keep growing, but that data is critical for us as we think about price determination this year.
You bring up cattle on feed, cattle inventory reports, those are which are set to come out toward the end of the month. Is it looking more and more like those may not happen here in January? And on the cattle inventory side of things, does that mean we have to wait until July?
You ask really good questions, of which I don't have really good answers, but I will say this: it seems like we're certainly potentially in a situation where those could get delayed. If we stay shut down for a number of weeks yet, then I could see us in a situation where for sure we just postpone, don't do cattle on feed until the following month at least. And the longer we go, the more apt we are to just move straight to the July cattle inventory report. That's okay, but I often say that January report's the critical one for the industry. So I hope we don't completely cancel that. And I say we again, USDA, but it's important to understand that the shutdown has implications for us that could last for several days as USDA tries to come back online once we get beyond the shutdown.
We do have some numbers to talk about. Retail prices in some form came out this week. As we take a look at beef and pork, are we surprised to see the numbers that we have?
So I don't think there's too much surprising. And again, I just remind us that this is a partial government shutdown. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics has in fact been open and provided us data on the overall consumer price index for many of the ag products. I guess we look at beef here to begin with. December beef retail price in general down 0.6% relative to a year ago, while that pork retail price down 1.4% relative to a year ago. A little bit of weakness, probably not too surprising on either front. Looked like we might have gotten some strength, counter seasonal strength in bacon prices again on the pork side that might be helpful. So just a little bit of data that frankly I'm glad to see. It helps us make sure at least what's happening on the retail side of the equation for these beef and pork markets.
Scott, that'll do it for us this week. As we look ahead to next week, not a lot of reports to talk about, but we will see consumer confidence. What are we looking for in those numbers?
Well, I'm sure looking for, I hope, the continuation of stronger consumer confidence. I like to remind us that for me, the big issue is we're going to be up nearly 3% again in terms of annual meat supplies in this country, and it takes both strong domestic demand and international demand to keep prices at reasonable levels. So let's hope we continue to see some good news out of that consumer confidence report.
Scott, good to see you again this week. We will talk next Friday.
That sounds great, Megan.
So have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning. Visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com. You can click subscribe. You can also submit questions and comments there as well. And for market updates twice daily, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner on Brownfield.